Hello, my name is Justin Whitcomb, and I am the lead pastor of Veritas Bible Church. I just want to thank you for joining us for another video in our Biblical Theology series. In this video, we're going to continue our examination of the content of God's special revelation during the Mosaic period. And so, outcomes for this video will be completely focused on God's disclosure through the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. The outcomes for the video then are to examine the application and character of the Decalogue and to examine the first four words. However, let's begin this video by briefly reading Exodus 21 through 17. The text says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." Before we get into examining the application and character of the Decalogue, I want to highlight something. Remember the forms of God's special revelation during this period. You see, we had revelation through Moses and revelation associated with Moses. We have already spent time examining in previous videos revelation associated with Moses. However, in this section of content, we're looking at revelation given through Moses. And now that the form has been established, let's examine the first component of the Decalogue's application and character. As we talk about application, we must notice something about the language. We see that the pronouns are in the feminine singular because they are addressed to Israel. There are features of that address that indicate this as well. God states he is the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So the language here gives an indication of specificity to Israel. However, when considering Israel and the bondage they were delivered from, what we see is a scenario that has been crafted by God to communicate a message to believers of all generations. The deliverance from bondage in Egypt speaks to those who are spiritually bound in sin. As we understand this nuance, it becomes evident that the Decalogue mustn't be viewed in isolation to Israel and that the application is truly worldwide. Third, we see that the Decalogue is specifically religious in character. This can be determined from the outset of the preamble. Exodus 21 through 2 says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." How this preamble reveals the character of the Decalogue is through the setting of the tone. God determines that he is not only their God, but he is the God of their redemption. It is this declaration that sets the tone of response that is seen through the Ten Commandments. Whether it is on the religious or ethical side, what we'll see is the practical nature of the Decalogue is revealed in the way it addresses itself to concrete external sins. Each of the Ten Commandments addresses the core issue of mankind, which is sin. Now, this brings us to the examination of the first four words. Why use the term word? Well, the usage of the term word instead of commandment is simply a technical preference used by Dr. Geerhardus Vos, whose work on this subject matter has been the major influence for this video series for this course. In keeping with his structure I've chosen to honor that usage. We'll begin this examination by noting that the formal numbering is imposed on the text. You see, there are 10 listed in the text, but notice that the text doesn't number them singly. This has led to various groupings amongst various traditions. Some Jewish groups have considered the preamble as a word, thus 11 words instead of 10. Certain Christian traditions have combined the first two and then taken the 10th and separated it. The traditional position, however, is to view the preamble outside the 10 and then attest to the traditional 10 that we have come to know. The reason for examining only the first four commandments, the first four words in this video, is due to the nature of the last six. You see, the last six pertain to the relationships of mankind, and as a result, it falls into the realm of Christian ethics. Now, considering we are discussing biblical theology, the first four relate specifically to the relation between man and God. And so we look to the first word. You shall have no other gods before me. This first word confines itself to the injunction that Israel will have only one subject of worship. What is interesting about this first commandment is that it neither denies or implies the existence of other divine beings. However, it wasn't the point of the word to dismiss any notion of other divine beings existing. In fact, by using the phrase that is chosen, what is revealed that it doesn't matter what other type of beings can be thought of or actually exist. It is only God that is worthy of worship. Exodus 24 through 6 says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments." The second word provides prohibition against the dangers of objects in worship. Oftentimes, the text is understood to say, do not make carved images of anything that is in the sky or the land or the water as objects of worship. However, the idea of carved images in the Hebrew is isolated from the term likeness. So, in the proper grammatical syntax, the text roughly reads, "Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, comma, and, comma, as to the likeness of anything that is in heaven above." This speaks to the difficulties of translation because Hebrew syntax poses troubles for English interpreters. However, understanding the proper, though rough, translation of the Hebrew, it becomes evident that the prohibition is against created images of God that can be used as an object of worship. This also really speaks to the context of the culture in which this is being written. Now, this speaks greatly to an issue that is found between Protestants and Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. You see, within the latter traditions, the use of icons is of great importance. Those traditions will make the claim that it is a matter of honor opposed to worship. However, this commandment's prohibition is a protection of true worship. You see, having an image that is used closely in a worshipful sense can lead it to becoming a second God and thus corrupting the worship to God. This is a bold claim that many Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics would have an issue with, but you can see through just mainstream apologetics for these traditions that icons, rosaries, other tools and images and things like that that are created play a very significant role within worship. Now, regardless of the veneration position on whether that is worship or whether that is simply honoring, the reality is that when you understand those in this context of this prohibition here, you can really understand the dangers of those things because once you remove icons in these images, it has an impact on the significance of their worship. People in that tradition may deny that, but if you just witness it, anecdotally, I've seen it firsthand, going to a Vesper service or going to various services amongst those traditions, they play a very significant role. And to remove them, I think would in some sense have an effect on their worship and thus really speaks to what I think is a major problem. Moving forward, though, we see in Exodus 20, verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. The third word prohibited the abuse of the divine name. So oftentimes when we think of the phrase don't use the Lord's name in vain, we associate with the haphazard use of the phrase, oh my God. Now, Dr. Vos notes that while this modern phenomenon isn't to be excluded because it has connection to the original use, we need to recognize the immediate context of this prohibition. You see, in pagan superstitions, one of the most powerful forms of word magic is name magic. It was believed that through the pronouncing of the name of some supernatural entity and repeating it, it could compel that being, that entity, to the bidding of the magic user. So, like the previous two commandments, this commandment is preserving the integrity of God and his supremacy among his people and the nations. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11 say, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son, or your daughter, or your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The common misinterpretation of the Sabbath, I would say, in a very mainstream Christian current, is that it is setting aside a day to do absolutely nothing. The notion is God didn't work on the seventh day, so I don't need to do anything. I need to do nothing. Now, this can be seen in the Jews of Jesus' day. You can see that how particular they were about doing absolutely nothing. But Jesus confronts that. And it's because when we adopt the Shemitic mindset, the proper mindset, we understand words tend to have a positive, not negative import. You see, to rest on the Sabbath day is to find deliberate joy and satisfaction in the work of God. And this means that the Sabbath does not prohibit the doing of things. Rather, the things that are done should be committed to the purpose of the Sabbath. Understanding that the Sabbath is rooted in creation also testifies this command extends to all of God's people. And in fact, it reflects what the life to come will be like, the great eschatological hope. A Jewish rabbi was once asked what the world will become like, and he answered, it will become like the Sabbath. Now, this concludes our examination of the Decalogue. In our next video, we are going to continue our examination of the content of God's special revelation during the Mosaic period. I appreciate you joining us for this video, and I hope that you will join us for the next one. God bless.